So we're going to be in chapter 17 for sure, possibly 18 if we can get to it. Now, the reason that I wanted to do this, the reason I want to try to cover 2 chapters, and I've been really bad about getting through one sometimes, so let alone trying to do 2, is not just because, Shayna, that we did it last week, but because these 2 chapters really go together. They really, really work together. And the reason is that in these 2 chapters, we are talking about Babylon. You say, okay, what about Babylon? What is it? Well, in Revelation, there is going to be a place that is going to be kind of the seat of the Antichrist's rule and the false prophet's rule. Some people think it is literally going to be the city of Babylon. And some people think the name Babylon or the old ancient city of Babylon is just going to kind of be the idea, and it may not actually be there, but it might be somewhere else. It could be, who knows? It could be Los Angeles, Washington D.C. It could be Baghdad. It could be what's the capital of Russia? It could be Moscow. Thank you. It could be Paris. I mean, it could be anywhere. Most likely it's going to be somewhere in the Middle East. But, last week when we talked about, as y'all know, we finished up the bowl trumpets last week. And in those bowl trumpets, that 6th bowl trumpet, judgment, in that 6th bowl judgment, there was the Euphrates River dried up, and it gave the pathway for the people to make their way, the armies that would fight against Israel, against God. It would make a pathway for them to go straight to Israel when the Euphrates River dries up. And then it says that those enemies would be gathered together, those nations would be gathered together in the valley of Megiddo, or where Armageddon, where we get our word Armageddon. And that's where they would gather together to then go fight against the Lord, go fight against God, go fight against Israel. What they think they're going to fight against Israel. The ancient city of Babylon was actually close to Baghdad in Iraq, and that is where it was located at. And that actually would be a place where you could go hit the Euphrates River and then actually travel up towards Jerusalem. So it makes sense that it could possibly be the actual city of Babylon. Now, if you want to think about Babylon as a city, and this is kind of the introduction I'm giving you now to both of these chapters. If you think about Babylon as the ancient city from the Old Testament, the name of that city was derived from the word in the Old Testament, Babel. Now you remember what's significant about the city of Babel in the Old Testament was that after the flood, Babel was kind of the main hub, the main place in all of the world at that point in time. And so the city of Babel was founded by one of Noah's great grandsons, a guy by the name of Nimrod. I thought that was funny because I was like, Nimrod, that's just what you call it. That's just one of those old, that's one of your granddaddy's old names for one of the grandkids that's acting up, right? Come here, you Nimrod, that's what I would have thought about hearing my granddaddy say something like that, But this was actually a guy who was Noah's great grandson. And he's not known for being a good guy. He was kind of known for being kind of a bad guy. And so he founded this city of Babel. The people of the city of Babel got to the point where they were like, we don't need God. We don't need God. Matter of fact, let's build a tower that reaches to the heavens so we can see if there really is a God, or we can just kind of go there and be there ourselves. And so that's why they started building this tower. Some of the ancient writers from around that time that's not collected in the Bible that are in like history, there's stories of seeing a ziggurat. How many of y'all remember studying world history? I remember hearing about a ziggurat. So a ziggurat was like the pyramids that were kind of the square pyramids. Think about like in when you see movies or stuff from like ancient our Hispanic cultures, when you see like those temples that they would use that had the stairs going down them. That's a ziggurat, okay? So there's stories of seeing a ziggurat that was 700 feet tall. The Washington Monument is about 550 feet tall. Anybody ever been to D.C.? Seen the Washington Monument? Seen that tall monument? That's about 550 feet tall. So there's historic accounts of people seeing in the distance a tower, a temple, a pyramid that they measured at 700 feet tall. Very well could possibly have been the Tower of Babel that they were building. And so as the people were building it, God basically said, no, you ain't doing this, and he knocked it down. Whether he used an earthquake, whether his literal hand went and slapped it and knocked it down. I don't know how God chose to do it, but he did it. And when he did that, he said, you know what, this ain't going to happen again. And he scrambled their language. They only had one language, but he scrambled their language and he sent them out. And so what happened was, you think about it, now all of a sudden there's these groups speaking different languages, and they used to could understand each other, and now they can't. So the ones who could understand each other, they kind of buddied up because they could talk. The other people, they couldn't talk to the other people. And so that's how people started spreading and starting their cultures and their people, was after they were spread out from there. So you think about that. This all happened in the ancient city of Babel, which was later called Babylon. Babylon, not only did all of this stuff happen there, but also during the time that Nimrod was alive and was reigning over the town of Babel, over the city of Babel, he was married. His wife was really big into worshiping idols. His wife's name was, make sure if I can get this right. Do what?
Dingbat.
Nimrod and Dingbat. Okay. All right. That kind of goes. It has a nice ring to it. So her name was Semiramis, and they had a son named Tammuz. All right. So when you sit back and you say, "Well, Jeremy, okay, I believe in the Bible. I believe in creation. I believe in these things," but isn't this just somebody's way of saying how all the different peoples of the world got to be where they're at? Isn't this just the Bible's way of saying, well, we got to have a reason? If we really believe that everybody come from Adam and Eve, there has to be a reason one day that people were spread out, talked different languages, and grew up in different customs. You got to be able to explain that. So this is just people who believe in the Bible. This is just their way of explaining that. Okay? Every culture, almost every culture, every group of people, if you go back in their history, has a recording of a worldwide flood. Almost every single people group has an ancient recording of a worldwide flood, a great flood. So right there, when you go back, that has to be something that singularly draws all these cultures, all these people groups together. Now, I told you about Nimrod's wife and his son, right? So his wife is actually referenced in the book of Ezekiel, and there are myths about her and her son that go back and predate a lot of the beginnings of some other religious groups. But there's this myth include Tammuz being miraculously born. That something about his birth was miraculous. We don't know what, but that there was some sort of miraculous birth that he had. And then also he was later killed by a beast of some sort. The ancient like Canaanite, or the ancient not Canaanite, but the ancient Hebrew people say it was a boar. It was a wild boar, and it gored him, and he died, and then he came back to life. And so he was like a savior to the people. And so he was looked at like a savior. Now, the Assyrians have a mother-son deity couple called named Ishtar and Tammuz, use the same name, Tammuz. The Canaanites had the same thing with somebody named Ashtoreth, and then Baal. We know in the Bible the false worship of Baal is mentioned, and that came through the Canaanite people. and Baal was the son of Ashtoreth. The Egyptians have Isis and Horus, which were again a mother-son combination of their gods. The Greeks have Aphrodite and Eros, and then the Romans have Venus and Cupid. You say, okay, wait a minute now. Now I'm seeing that all of these other religions that were practiced around the area of the Middle East, in and around the area of the Middle East, they all have this same similar mother-son God, worship group that is very, very similar to, what was her name again? Dingbat? Shumaramus and her son Tammuz. So here's the thing. If Nimrod's wife and son were born, and during the time they were there, they were building the Tower of Babel, God created the earthquake, knocked down the Tower of Babel, confused their language, spread them out, but they all knew about Nimrod's wife and son, and so they're already into worshiping false gods and not the true God. So they took that belief with them when God scattered them to different places, and therefore you have that same mother-son combination found in all these different religions. It kind of gives some validity to God's word in saying that this really did happen. Now, the place of Babylon is where all of astrology, the occult, zodiac signs, all of this stuff started. Its roots can all be taken back to Babylon at this time. And so this is what I want you to think about here. The same kind of thing that happened here in Babylon is going to be continued in the book of Revelation, and where we see, especially in chapter 17, the false prophet and the worship of the beast happening during the time of tribulation. All of the occult, all of the false God worship that started in our world, where it started from, it's going to end at the same place, in Babylon. That's why I kind of agree with the scholars who say that the actual city of Babylon, which is not there right now. There's only ruins of the city right now. Because see, when you remember in history, remember when you study through the book of Esther, and Esther is the Jewish girl who goes before the king, and the king, her uncle Mordecai, puts her in the contest. She wins the contest. The king marries her. That was the Persian Empire that was ruling the world at that time. The reason why the Persian Empire was ruling the world is because they destroyed the Assyrians, who had taken over and had actually went in and took over from the Hebrews. They actually went in and took the northern kingdom of Israel and took them captive. And then later on, the Assyrians were then taken captive by the Persians, and then they ruled. Y'all remember y'all ever see the movie or remember the movie 300 when it came out with what was the dude's name? Was it Gerard Butler that he played the actor? But this is a side note, but did you ever look at the workout they had to do to get in the shape that they were in for that movie? Yeah. I think there was some CGI and some airbrushing on those pics, but I'm just saying that those dudes were ripped for that movie. But that was Sparta, right? Sparta. So they took on the Persians, and remember, if you remember, the Persians had all these different groups that they were sending up against them. People from the Far East, people from the Middle East, people from all over the world that they had conquered. Persia was a major world power at that time. They destroyed Babylon, and Babylon wasn't back as a city again after that. Now, we heard of Babylon in the 90s, and there was a particular event that went on. And does anybody know what that was? But before we do that, Babylon actually was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Nebuchadnezzar. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? He was the king that threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. I'm getting to a point here, y'all. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego threw them in the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar had built these hanging gardens. And these hanging gardens were so beautiful, they were looked at as one of the 7 wonders of the entire world. And then after it was destroyed, all that was gone. Well, back in the 90s, we had a conflict that America got into. Remember what that was?
Desert Storm.
Desert Storm. Desert Storm. Remember who the bad guy of Desert Storm was? The king of Iraq? Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein thought he was the second coming of Nebuchadnezzar. Matter of fact, during I don't remember if it was the 80s or 90s, if it was before the Gulf War started, before the Desert Storm started, but Saddam Hussein actually had a coin minted in Iraq that had, Michael's shaking his head at me, that had his face on one side and King Nebuchadnezzar on the other side. He really thought he was going to be King Nebuchadnezzar, and he tried to start rebuilding Babylon. And his plans was to make Babylon back into this great city, but he never got to do it. Never got to do it. Why do you say all this, Jeremy? Because Babylon has been the center of ungodly things, of false idol worship, of false gods for years until it was destroyed. And now as we read in the book of Revelation, we're going to see where Babylon, whether in theory or whether an actual city, whichever it is going to come back into prominence during the time of tribulation. And then we're going to see what happens to them. All right, so y'all ready to jump right in? So, I did. Yes, ma'am. So, Babylon in chapter 17, as we read about it, is going to be represented by a woman. You're going to see that in a minute. She's going to be called the Great Harlot. And I will kind of explain why she's called that, the Great Harlot or Great Prostitute. Or I think even the King James Version uses the word whore. But that is what she, there's strong language, but there's a reason it's strong language. We'll get into that in a minute. So chapter 17 is talking about the spiritual Babylon. And then when you get to chapter 18, it's going to be talking about commercial and political Babylon, like the commerce, the things that are going on in the world, the buying and selling, all of that stuff. Okay, so let's look here. Let's go ahead and read through. Chapter 17 has 18 verses. Let's read the whole chapter, and then we'll talk about it. Chapter 17, verse 1. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. But the angel said to me, "Why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. When they see the beast when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. They are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and give their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Okay, Jeremy, the word Babylon was not in there at all, except for the mystery, the name on her forehead. Okay. 17, verse 1 and 2. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and taught me. So one of the angels that had just poured out the bowls of judgment, the bowls of wrath, comes to John and he says, hey, come with me, let me show you this great harlot who sits on many waters. So he tells her about her first. He says, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her and are made drunk on the wine of her fornication. Why this language? Why this strong language of calling her a harlot, talking about fornication and all this stuff? Why in the world are we talking about that? Because this woman is a picture of the one world false religion that the false prophet is going to be the head of. Remember when we studied back in chapter 13? Remember in chapter 13, I believe it was, we were told about the beast that came out of the sea and the beast that came from the earth. And as we studied, remember the beast that came from the sea had 10 horns, had 7 heads and 10 horns. And it was the Antichrist. We talked about how that all those things represented the different parts of what made the Antichrist the Antichrist. And then the beast that came out of the earth in the second half of that chapter was the false prophet who was going to be over the one world religion at that time, at the time of tribulation, and was going to be pointing people to the Antichrist and saying, this is him, this is God, this is who we worship. And so now what we're seeing is more of a further description of that world religion, that one world religion that's going to be going on the earth during the time of tribulation. So when you see that strong language of a harlot and the talk of fornication, that is because God intended the church to be his bride. God calls Israel his wife. He calls the church the bride of Christ. We are looked at as being one to be joined with God and be pure and holy, or pure and righteous when we join with God. It doesn't mean we're sinless. It means his people as a whole, because they have accepted Christ as their Savior and covered by the blood of Christ and seen in his righteousness, are pure when we either after we die or when we're taken in the rapture, so that we're in the presence of God. When you look at someone who is worshiping a false god, and not only just any false religion or false god, they are worshiping the Antichrist, it is as though they are committing adultery on God or on Jesus because of the way God looks at us, right? So you see why that language is used, and the woman is called a harlot, and it's talking about the fornication of the kings of the earth with her, because they've turned from what they're supposed to be, their relationship with Christ and with God through Christ, and now they are worshiping a false god. And so that false god is looked at as the harlot, the great harlot. And that's why that language is used, because God says, this is such a big thing that I have set in motion the plan of redemption, and basically to make you my bride, to be the one that I love and I cherish and I want to be married to, and I want to have us to be together forever in heaven. And you've basically committed adultery with this other religion, with this other person. And so that's why this language is used, and why it is such a big thing here. And he says that the great harlot sits on many waters. Now later on in verse 15, we read that he actually the angel tells John that the mystery of the woman, the mystery of the waters. And he says the waters that she's sitting on is a great multitude of people, is nations and tongues, multitudes. And if you remember last week when we studied chapter 15, we saw in front of the throne, we saw the sea of glass, or sea that was like glass, and it was mingled with fire. We talked about anytime you see a sea or waters, a lot of times in the book of Revelation, a lot of times that is a picture of big groups of people or nations of people. And so here, when you see that she's sitting on many waters, the angel goes and tells John later on, this is big groups of people. So these are the people of the world, and he tells us it's the people whose names are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life. People who have not given their life for Christ during the tribulation, or people who have gone on before. It is the people who are worshiping the beast, who have taken the mark, who are not following God. They are the people, the waters that she's sitting on. And so she's sitting on the waters, and then he says when he sees her, in verse 4, she's arrayed in purple and scarlet. Verse 3, she's sitting on a scarlet beast, has these names of blasphemy, and the beast has the 7 heads and 10 horns. And we know back from chapter 13 that that's the Antichrist, because he had the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Heads meaning wisdom, and heads over a lot of things. Horns meaning power and authority. And we're actually going to find out that power and authority comes from 10 different regions of the earth that have been pulled together into kingdoms. And then they started ruling, and then they gave their authority to the Antichrist. And so then he becomes the head of those 10 different groups. And that's the representation of the 10 horns. So we're seeing this name on her forehead. She has this name. It says she was seen drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And I saw her and I marveled with great amazement. So she's drunk with the blood. We know, if you go back to chapter 13, the false prophet says, hey, everybody's going to worship the Antichrist. And anybody that does not worship the Antichrist, he was given the authority to do what? To kill him, to put him to death. And so here it says that this religion, this one world religion, is drunk with the blood of the saints, of the martyrs of Jesus that they have killed. Now, in the study of church history and ancient history and believers as they've gone through and studied Revelation through the years, there's been a couple of thoughts of what the one world religion would be. One of the biggest ones that gets brought up is the Roman Catholic Church. And so that's one of the biggest ones that gets brought up. Well, why is that? Well, later on we read where she was sitting on 7 mountains or 7 hills. And the Rome was built on 7 hills, 7 mountains. And it talks about that. And then there are a couple of other things. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. People say, from there, people have said, well, then it's got to be the Islamic nations. It's got to be Islam. Because Islam hates the Jews. They hate Christians. They hate America. They've already taken out and killed so many different people in their areas. They've already martyred so many different Christians and Jews and different people who, and so what's to say they won't continue to do that, and it's a very violent religion. Yes, that's all true. But I don't think this is going to be a religion that is going to pull everybody together that's in the world. It's going to pull together Russian people. It's going to pull together the Asian countries. It's going to pull together whatever's left of America. It's going to pull together all of our Hispanic nations that are there. It's going to pull together all the different nations of the world are going to come together. I think this religion is something we haven't seen yet, and it's going to be some sort of conglomeration of all of them. It's going to be bigger than Islam. It's going to be bigger than Catholics. It's going to be bigger than Christians. It's going to be bigger than Judaism. It's going to be the biggest religious system that the world, Buddhism, is going to be bigger than that. It's going to be the biggest religious system the world has ever seen. So a lot of people will tell you, and they have reasons that sound good It's going to be the Roman Catholic Church. It's going to be the Roman Catholic Church. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. We in Protestant denominations, we tend to sometimes kick our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters a little bit, and at times some of that's warranted because they've done some things that seem occultish. There are some things within the Roman Catholic Church that are not godly, right? But there are also people who are Catholics who are saved and go into heaven and love Jesus and love the Lord. Just like within our brothers and sisters in different denominations that truly look at Jesus for who Jesus really is. There's good old Baptists and Pentecostals that are sitting in church that if they died right now, they'd bust hell wide open.
Yeah, that's right.
There are saved people and there are lost people sitting in every denomination.
That's right.
And that's why, regardless of what the makeup of the church looks like when we speak and when we talk, we cast the net. We tell people about Jesus. We ask people about salvation because I can look at you and say, Brother Ivy, you look like a good Christian man. You look like somebody who knows the Lord's going to heaven, but I don't know your heart. And I can't say that. So I want everybody to have an opportunity to know Jesus as their Savior and come to know Him, regardless of who you are and what you look like. And so we see this woman here, and then the angel starts talking to him in verse 7. He says, I'm just going to tell you about the mysteries, about what's going on, and so you don't have to wonder about it. He talks about the beast that's carrying her, how that's going to be associated with the big world political system. Then he talks about the seven heads, the 7 mountains, are sitting on the 7 hills. Now let's look at verse 10. He says, there are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. Like, okay, what kind of coded message is that? All right, well, I want to share that with you. So, he says, he's talking about kings. He's talking about 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not. When he says this, when he talks about kings, he's not just talking about like the king of Iran, or he's not necessarily just talking about like, he's actually talking about kingdoms. And this is bigger than just a king. This is like a world dominating kingdom. So when you go back and you look at world history, there and two, you got to think this is the angel talking to John at this point, right? Because he says the angel took him. He went by the Spirit into the wilderness to see these things, to see the woman, to see what was happening on the earth at this time. When he's telling him about this, he's telling him about these kingdoms that are going to be on the earth. John is currently in real time right now. John, remember, he's on the Isle of Patmos. He's exiled. He's there getting this vision of all these future events that are going to happen. So for John's time, you got to think about what were the world dominating cultures that had been over in power of the world at that time. Well, number 1, you had Egypt. Pharaoh, remember Pharaoh had the Hebrew people as slaves. Egypt had widespread power at that time. They were a world power. Later on, we saw the Assyrians. We've kind of talked about them already. The Assyrians were also a world power. Then you had the Babylonians. Then you had the people about that group. That was King Nebuchadnezzar and that group. They took over the world for a while. Then you had the Persians, or the Medo-Persians. Who took over. They conquered Assyria, and then they came to a world power, conquered Babylon, and all of that. They came to a world power. Then after them was Greece. The Greeks had come to a major power. That's why their religions are so well known and so spread, and we read about so much of that. The Greeks had taken over. So you had Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and then Greece. So there's 5 kings, 5 kingdoms, who had, by this time, the time that John was writing this or was given this vision, all 5 of those kingdoms had had their time and power and then had fallen. Then he says, one is. Who was the major world power at the time that John is writing this? Rome. Rome conquered. They said Rome's borders went from all the way up into England, all the way down into Africa, all the way into like Russia and into parts of Asia. Rome was at this time was one of the greatest nations, greatest world dominating kingdoms we ever had. It said one is, and then he said after that, one is, and the other has not yet come. Has anybody, since the Roman Empire fell, has there been any one world dominating power on the earth? I wouldn't even say us, because even though we've gotten into world wars and went and fought, we haven't, when we won World War II, we didn't then say, okay, well now we're claiming all this for now America includes half of Europe and this and that, No, we came back to America and stayed in America. So I wouldn't put the U.S. as that. Somebody tried to. Hitler tried. Russia tried. They have tried, but they've not been successful. So the one who is not yet come is the Antichrist. And he will be over this one world government that we read about in chapter 18. But he is the one who has not yet come. And because he says, and when he comes, he must continue a short time. So his time is limited. He's going to have that run of about 3.5 good years, and then a couple more years, and by the end of that 7 years, his time is up. He's going to have a short run, but he's still going to have a run as a world power, as a world dominating power. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. So here, this is a picture of 10 different world groups. That this is how the Antichrist is going to be that one king that's going to come. There's 10 groups. At some point in time, they're going to form up. During John's time, they hadn't formed yet. That's why he's saying they're not yet. But they'll have their hour. They'll get their power, and then they're going to be enthused by the Antichrist, and they're going to say, "Man, okay, we're going to go with him, and we're going to join up with these other 9 countries, these other 9 areas, and we're going to let the Antichrist, whatever his name is going to be, we're going to let him be our leader, and therefore he's going to get that power for whatever amount of time during the 7-year tribulation that he's going to get it, and it's going to come from 10 different areas in the world." These are of one mind. They will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them. We'll read that in chapter 19. Those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. Then he said, the waters which you saw, the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Skip on down to verse 17. Just go to 16. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. What in the world? So the 10 horns, remember that's the 10 groups that give their power and authority to the Antichrist. They're going to at some point in time rebel against the one world religion. They're going to say, listen, we're following the Antichrist. He's our leader. He's the leader of our big political nation. But we're tired of this one world religion thing. We're tired of this. And so they're actually going to turn on the religion part of it and basically do away with it. It says makes her desolate naked, eats her flesh, and burns her with fire. So in other words, that the one world religion at some point, this is probably going to be towards the end of the 7 years of tribulation, is going to be done. The one world religion is going to be done. So then he says, for God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind and give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman who you saw is that great city, Babylon, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Spiritual Babylon, the false religion, the one world false religion led by the false prophet that we learned about in chapter 13.
Yeah, there's already, you've already got in the world now those that are saying that the only real way that we're ever going to have peace in this world is to do away with all religion. It's already here. And spirit's already moving.
Yep.
And it comes to fruition in that passage.
Yep. They'll feel like they have succeeded.
They've rounded it up and they've wiped it out.
At this time there's only one religion in the world, and so they could finally wipe it out. Even though it's part of what Satan thinks is he's got control of what's going on, and the whole time God's like, this was my plan from the beginning, so don't worry about it. Okay. 18 or save 18 for next week? Save it? Alright. It's trying to say there's 24 verses. Alright, so any questions about 17? Any questions about 17?
You're studying this at.
Where am I studying at?
Tell me, because this is the most theologically correct teaching of the Revelation I've heard since Bible college.
I found a guy.
Yeah,
I found a couple of guys I'll give you their names. So I'm getting a lot of. I'm gonna turn this off.